3 Sem. B. Com. BBA Generic Chapter 2, Persuasive Speeches. 1. Swami Vivekananda. Summary. Vivekananda became a popular figure worldwide after the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago, where he began his famous speech with the words, "Sisters and Brothers of America," before introducing Hinduism to Americans. He was so impactful at the Parliament that an American newspaper described him as an orator by divine right and undoubtedly the greatest figure. The first session of the Parliament was held on Monday, the 11 inches of September 1893 in the spacious hall of the Art Institute. Many people, who arrived representing different religions such as Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity and many more, were busy reading their own prepared speeches. On the other hand, there was Swami Vivekananda, who did not prepare any speech and decided to speak whatever he knew about Hinduism. Vivekananda introduced Hinduism to his Western audience and spoke about the importance of religious harmony and universal brotherhood. He began his speech with a humble "Sister and Brother of America," which received an overwhelming response from the audience. He explained how Hindus opened their arms to refugees of other religions such as Israelites and Zoroastrians. Swami Vivekananda, in his speech, made a powerful statement. He said, "Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now." Vivekananda emphasized on letting religions follow their own path. He also spoke about how he doesn't want conversion of religions or the overpowering of one religion over another. Rather, he wants each religion to follow its own path and grow into their own being without hindering the journey of another. Vivekananda, of course, explained this sentiment with a moving rhetorical question. He said to the crowd in Chicago, "Do I wish that the Christian would become Hindu? God forbid. Do I wish that the Hindu or Buddhist would become Christian? God forbid." He brought the idea of Hinduism to America. The audience was undoubtedly impressed by his speech, and it is still talked about and discussed to this date. People in America were also intrigued by the ideals introduced by Swami Vivekananda through his explanation of Hinduism, a concept not well understood by Westerners at the time. Although he died at a young age of 39, his teachings and influential quotes has earned him immortality. 2. Mahatma Gandhi. Speechat Kingsley Hall, London, in 1931. Summary. On October 1931, Mahatma Gandhi made a famous speech called The Spiritual Message on God. It happened in Kingsley Hall, London. Theme of the speech. In the speech, Gandhi says absolutely nothing about Indian independence, British oppression, or the aims and tactics of the movement. He says nothing at all about politics or any worldly affairs whatsoever. Instead, he lectures on the existence of God, an indefinable mysterious power that pervades everything, and which defies all proof. Gandhi testifies to an unalterable law governing everything and every being that exists or lives, though he also confesses that "I have no argument to convince through reason." Instead relies on analogies, on things he dimly perceives, on the marvelous researches of Indian engineer and scientist Sir J.C. Bose, and on the experiences of an unbroken line of prophets and sages in all countries and climes. It's not a speech likely to persuade anyone who isn't already some sort of a believer, but it's of much interest to anyone interested in the history of Indian independence and in Gandhi's life and message. Analysis of the speech. Indefinable mysterious power. Speaking about an indefinable mysterious power, Gandhi says that he could feel that unseen power and perceive through its senses. It transcends the sensed. He further mentions that the existence of God cannot be reasoned out. Even in our day-to-day we know we are ruled by a power, but we don't know who rules or why and how. Gandhi's tour to Mysore. Recalling his tour in Mysore, Mahatma Gandhi says that he had met many poor villagers and found that they had no idea how ruled Mysore. They simply said some god ruled Mysore. Mahatma Gandhi gets surprised having known that the knowledge of these people was so poor about their ruler, and he felt that need not be surprised if he had not realized the presence of God, the King of Kings. Unalterable law governing everything. Further, he says that there is orderliness in the universe and there is an unalterable law governing everything and every being that exists or lives. It is not a blind law, for no blind law can govern the conduct of living being. Gandhi ji further acknowledges the researches. F46. Three Sem. B. Com. BBA. Of Sir J.C. Bose regarding the law which governs all life is God. He accepts that he knows a little about it or him. God's benevolent power. Gandhi ji further mentions that humble and mute acceptance of divine authority makes life's journey easier, even as the acceptance of earthly rule makes life under it easier. He dimly perceives that whilst everything around him is ever changing, ever dying, there is underlying all that change a living power that is changeless, that holds all together, that creates, dissolves and recreates. The power is benevolent because he can see that in the midst of death life persists, in the midst of untruth truth persists. He is love. God is the supreme good. God must express himself in every smallest act of his votary. This can only be done through a definite realization, more real than the five senses can ever produce. An immovable faith, the law of truth and love. An immovable faith, the law of truth and love. Sense perceptions can be and often are false and deceptive, however real they may appear to us. Where there is realization outside the senses, it is infallible. It is proved not by extraneous evidence but in the transformed conduct and character of those who have felt the real presence of God within. Such testimony is to be found in the experiences of an unbroken line of prophets and sages in all countries and climes. To reject this evidence is to deny oneself. This realization is preceded by an immovable faith. He who would in his own person test the fact of God's presence can do so by a living faith, and since faith itself cannot be proved by extraneous evidence, the safest course is to believe in the moral government of the world and therefore in the supremacy of the moral law, the law of truth and love. Exercise of faith will be the safest where there is a clear determination summarily to reject all that is contrary to truth and love. Confession. At the end of the speech, Mahatma Gandhi confesses that he has no argument to convince through reason. Faith transcends reason. All that he can advise is not to attempt the impossible. 3. Steve Jobs, Stanford Commencement Speech in 2005. Summary. In the speech, Steve Jobs' commencement address to Stanford University, Class of 2005, Apple's CEO Steve Jobs provides his audience with personal experiences and the rough periods he went through in his early years before founding Apple that helped him succeed. With the use of his stories, Jobs creates a character that prevails through obstacles and manages to achieve his goals, which inspires his audience to look up to him and show that failure is sometimes necessary to succeed. At the beginning of his speech, Steve Jobs begins describing his life with a series of stories that helped him reach his success. This helps Jobs create ethos because his audience will understand the hardships he went through to be where he is today, instead of just thinking of Jobs as the founder of Apple and not really knowing about the struggles he had to go through. First story, a dropout. In his early college days, he dropped out of his regular classes. Jobs explains that his regular classes were not interesting to him and he didn't believe they would help him succeed in the future, so he took up calligraphy classes. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and he found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in his life. But 10 years later, when they were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to him. And they designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If he had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If he had never dropped out, he would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when he was in college. But it was very, very clear looking backward 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This. F52. Ilsem. B. Com. BBA General. Approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life. Second story is about love and loss. Speaking on his second story about love and loss, Steve Jobs was lucky because he found what he loved to do early in life. He started Apple in his parents' garage when he was 20. After 10 years of hard work, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. They had just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and he had just turned 30. Jobs was fired from Apple back in 1985 because the board believed he was no longer useful to the company. In fact, they believed he was being detrimental to the business. He says, our visions of the future began to diverge and our board of directors sided with him. Jobs chose to talk about how he was fired from Apple, the company he had founded, because it reveals Jobs' biggest failure. He had spent most of his adult life growing the company, only to have it taken away. Yet Jobs pushed on and recovered it later on. This use of pathos strengthens the connection with his audience, and shows how someone so successful once reached rock bottom, yet managed to climb his way back up, and it inspires them to be like. He met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. He was a very public failure, and he even thought about running away from the valley. It turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened. To him, the heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner. Again, less sure about everything, it freed him to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. During the next 5 years, he started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become his wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next. He returned to Apple, and the technology they developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance, and Lorene and he had a wonderful family together. He was sure none of this would have happened if he hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for your work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And, like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking until you find it. Don't settle. Third story is about death. When Steve Jobs was 17 years old, he read a quote. "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and F53 EVERSHINE. Then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. When Steve Jobs was diagnosed with cancer, doctors told him that it was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that he should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months, and he was advised to take rest. Later he had a surgery. This was the closest he had been to facing death. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It is life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now the new is you, but someday not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it is quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When Steve Jobs was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of his generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and he was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry. Stay foolish." J.K. Rowling, speech at Harvard University on the fringe benefits of failure and the importance of imagination. Summary. In 2008, J.K. Rowling delivered a powerful graduation speech at Harvard University. It was, in many ways, absolutely spellbinding and quickly became the most viewed commencement address on Harvard's website. Through her dual themes of fear and imagination, Rowling echoes the philosophy of the Stoics in her advice to Harvard graduates. Ultimately, This speech is a plea to her audience. 3. Be calm, BBA generic. To avoid the pitfalls of privilege and to use their human capability of imagination to make a life for themselves that really matters. As Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling prepared her Harvard commencement speech, she felt a deep responsibility to deliver words of wisdom that would resonate with some of America's most elite university graduates. So she considered the advice she wished someone had bestowed onto her as a young graduate. She decided to convey the lessons she learned the hard way, and advice she wished someone had given her when she was a graduate. She came up with 2 core lessons: appreciate the value of failing and recognize the importance of imagination. Opening with pathos. Throughout her career, J.K. Rowling has been criticized in the media for her apparent lack of warmth. Her fans, of course, will be quick to jump to her defense, explaining that she is just shy. Perhaps cognizant of her reputation, Rowling uses her first remarks to engender audience connection with humble humor and self-deprecation. The first thing I would like to say is thank you. Not only has Harvard given me an extraordinary honor, but the weeks of fear and nausea I have endured at the thought of giving this address have made me lose weight. A brief appeal to ethos. Then an appeal to ethos, with the briefest nod to her Harry Potter fans. Now all I have to do is take deep breaths, squint at the red banner, and convince myself that I am at the largest Gryffindor reunion. Quote, "It is okay to be nervous." So, we know Rowling is nervous delivering this address. Who wouldn't be? But the reason that we know she is nervous is that she says so. Once it is out in the open, we see the signs of nerves, relying a little too much on her notes, faltering voice, and protective stance. Sometimes you don't want your audience to be aware of your trepidation, so keep the admission to yourself. In this case, her admission might well have been in the service of pathos. Either way, it is okay to be nervous. The fact that you have the jitters should not dissuade you from delivering a speech, especially if you have something important to say. And J.K. Rowling goes on to prove that she has something very important to say. A powerful message for the audience of Harvard grads, but for many other listeners across the globe, especially those with privilege and advantage. Theme 1. Fear of failure. Rowling identified her greatest fear as the fear of failure. She goes on to recount that 7 years after her university graduation she was, by any objective measure of failure, she found herself divorced, unemployed, a single parent, and quite poor. In other words, her greatest fear had become a reality. But in this quandary she found liberty. At her lowest ebb, Rowling had no way of knowing how her story would play out. The success she would achieve, at that stage, was merely a dream. And yet, she had this to say about how failure served her. Evershine. Failure meant the stripping away of the essential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was and began to direct all my energy at the only work that ever mattered to me. Had I ever succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena where I felt I truly belonged. I was set free, because my greatest fear had been realized and I was still alive. And then, Rowling's own interpretation, Stoicism, enchanted with her powers of metaphor. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I built my life. Theme 2. The importance of imagination. The second and primary theme of this speech is the importance of human imagination. J.K. Rowling has an original take on this subject. Essentially, her argument is that only humans have the capacity to appreciate the situation of others, or as she puts it, they can think themselves into other people's places. And it is our duty to use this power, coupled with our privilege to make the world a better place. The enemies of progress are the willfully unimaginative, because we could all fall into the trap where we refuse to hear screams or peer into cages. Profoundly, she says. What is more, those who choose not to empathize enable real monsters. For without ever committing an act of outright evil ourselves, we collude with it through our own apathy. We have the power to imagine better. Skillful tension release. After delivering such a heady message, complete with a quote from Seneca, Rowling skillfully releases the pressure with a joke. She praises her former classmates for not suing her and using their names as Death Eaters. Thus she provokes the expected round of chuckles. But his is more than a joke for the sake of humor. Rowling is aware that she needs to deliver these young graduates back to the state of mind appropriate for the celebrations that will ensue. 5. Subrata Bagchi, Go Kiss the World Inspirational Speech. Summary. Go Kiss the World is an inspiration to the young Indians, to those who come from small town India, urging them to recognize and develop their inner strengths, thereby helping them realize their own potential. This is a speech by Subrata Bagchi to the class of 2006 at the IIM Bangalore. Bagchi narrates his story from his birth and upbringing in a small town in rural Odisha. Bagchi's father was a district employment officer in Koraput, Orissa. He was their fifth and the last child. His mother was a refugee from East Bengal. She was a matriculate and was refugee from East Bengal. She was a matriculate and was raised by a widow. In Koraput there was no electricity, no primary school, due to which his schooling was done at home. Since his father was a government employee, he used to get transferred every year. He was given a jeep by the government, but he never used the jeep to commute to the office, telling that it is an expensive resource given by the government. Instead, he used it only to tour the interiors. Thus he learned his first lesson, the lesson to never misuse public facilities. They were also taught to respect the jeep driver just like any other member of his office, treating small people with respect. Their morning routine started with tea. Subrata's father had a habit of reading the newspaper daily. He and his brother was supposed to read it aloud. Though he did not understand much of what was written in the paper, he still contributed his good English to that habit. After reading, he was taught to fold it correctly. You should leave your newspaper in your toilet the way you expect to find it. All the brothers used to ask their father to buy a new radio and a house of their own, but their father never bought these things, and they learned not to measure personal success and sense of well-being through material possession. The house which the government gave them rarely had fences. He and his mother used to 3 Sem. B. Com. BBA Generic English. Make the fences and decorate the house by planting seeds. People asked her what's the need to beautify a government house. She replied that she has to create a bloom in a desert, and for that she has to leave every place given to her more beautiful than what she had inherited. It is not what you create for yourself, it is what you leave behind that defines success. Subrata's mother started developing cataract in her eyes. His elder brother got a teaching job in Bhubaneswar and was also preparing for civil services examination. His mother and he had to move to Bhubaneswar as a helping hand to his brother. In Koraput, since there was no electricity, he had never seen a single fan running. The water did not flow out of tap. For the first time he saw electricity in houses and water coming from taps. They discussed the daily news and built a bond with the larger universe. He used to feel a sense of larger connectedness with the world that made up another lesson for him, which meant to be connected with a larger world. During that time there was a war between India and Pakistan. Lal Bahadur Shastri's words, Jai Jawan Jai Kisan, sparked the entire country. He dreamt about catching a terrorist and to read his news on the newspapers. Imagination taught him that if he can imagine a future, he can create it. And if he can create it, others will live it. His mother's eyesight deteriorated in a very few years. She had to operate it, and in a span of time she developed a corneal ulcer and she became blind in both eyes. But she never complained. She spent her 32 years with her blindness. I do not see darkness. I only see light even with my eyes closed. She would perform yoga and would do all the household activities. Subroto was appointed as a clerk in a government office. He was blessed with 2 daughters and settled in USA. His father was leading a retired life and had suffered third-degree burn and was admitted in the Safdarjung hospital. Even in his critical stage, he was concerned about the overworked nurse than his own state. He lost his father, but his principles and the lessons taught by him made me become a successful person. His father was the believer of British Raj and doubted the capability of post-independence political parties to govern the country, but mother believed the exact opposite. Success is not the ability to create a dogmatic end state but a process of continuous thinking. His mother passed away at the age of 82. She had a paralytic stroke. He spent his time looking after his mother. While leaving, he kissed her face. She replied, "Why are you kissing me? Go kiss the world." She tells him to stay connected to a larger world existence and live his life instead being sad to his mother.